Live on national TV in Phoenix, Jasmine Crockett was calmly answering questions about democracy until Donald Trump suddenly called in to interrupt. He mocked her, blamed her party for America's chaos, and tried to tear her down in front of millions. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She answered not with rage, but with facts, precision, and one brutal truth that left Trump speechless. When noise tries to crush truth, what happens when truth finally hits back? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights inside the Phoenix Convention Center were steady, but the silence felt electric, like a wire stretched too tight. Every seat was filled, but no one moved. Veterans with stiff backs, teachers still in work clothes, retired factory workers with calloused hands folded in their laps. A row of college students leaned forward, elbows on knees. No one was clapping. No one was smiling. They weren't here for a performance. They were here for something real. Then Jasmine Crockett walked in. No music, no entourage, no teleprompter. She didn't wave. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just walked straight to her seat in a navy blazer and boots that looked like they'd seen protest lines. Not red carpets. Her steps were quiet, but each one landed like a warning. She sat down slowly, controlled, composed. Her eyes scanned the crowd like she was reading the temperature, and it was rising. The moderator didn't wait. His voice was calm, but the question hit like a punch to the ribs. What worries you most about the current state of our democracy? The pause that followed wasn't hesitation. It was loaded. Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Her voice was low, but clear and cutting. The biggest threat to democracy, she said, is when politics turns into performance. She let the sentence hang in the air. The room didn't breathe. Then came the next blow. When people care more about applause lines than policy lines. Her eyes didn't move from the moderator. Her tone didn't change. When public service becomes self-promotion, another pause, then, with a final snap. That's not leadership. That's theater. A woman in the back gasped softly. A man in uniform nodded once, then twice. The room wasn't calm anymore. It was charged like someone just snapped the air in half. There was no music, no slogan, no applause sign. Just the feeling that something was about to crack. Emotions hadn't even settled from her last line when the control booth erupted. Just seconds after Jasmine's words cut through the air like a clean blade, the back of the hall lit up with frantic movement. Inside the sound booth, red lights blinked on like warning signals. A headset dropped. Someone swore under their breath. One of the producers, mid-30s, usually stone-faced, suddenly went pale, pointing toward the emergency feed monitor. Another crew member scrambled to grab a cue card, but fumbled it to the floor. Behind the moderator, a stage assistant sprinted to the edge of the frame, waving both arms like he was flagging down a landing aircraft. The moderator squinted, clearly confused, then leaned toward the assistant as a whisper reached his ear. And then his whole expression shifted, jaw slack, spine stiff, like he'd just seen a ghost wearing a red tie. His fingers tightened around his stack of index cards, knuckles blanching. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. They could feel something was wrong, but no one knew what yet. Then the moderator's mic crackled, and he turned slowly to face the audience. His voice trembled slightly. We've just been informed that President Trump is calling in. Live. The reaction wasn't just audible, it was visceral. People jerked in their seats. Gasps escaped from every corner of the room. One man in the front row muttered, "You've got to be kidding me," while a woman near the back laughed once, dry, disbelieving. Half the crowd instinctively looked around to see if this was a joke. The other half stared forward, frozen. A teacher gripped her pen so tightly it snapped. A student whispered, "He just can't help himself." Tension surged like a fuse had been lit beneath the floor. The room, just moments ago respectful and engaged, now vibrated with uncertainty. Excitement clashed with annoyance. Hope collided with dread. A few Trump supporters began to sit up straighter, visibly emboldened. Others groaned and shook their heads. Phones started coming out of pockets, not to record but to check if what they were hearing was real. The moderator looked like he wanted to melt into his seat. Eyes wide, shoulders stiff, he glanced desperately toward the booth, mouthing, "What do I say?" But the cameras were still rolling. Millions were watching. There was no off switch now. And yet, at the very center of this storm, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She hadn't turned her head during the chaos. She hadn't blinked. She didn't reach for notes. She just sat there, elbows on the armrests, calm as a locked door. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned her gaze to the moderator. Her voice was steady, not loud, not rehearsed, just real. "Put him through," she said. "I don't run from the truth." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They went dead quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens right before something crashes. The kind of silence that means the room had just shifted. Not because Jasmine tried to match chaos with chaos, but because she refused to. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Not in defiance, but in total composure. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Her eyes didn't wander. They locked on the moderator like a challenge had just been accepted. And in that moment, it was no longer a Q&A session. It wasn't a town hall. It was a fuse burning toward impact. And everyone in that room, everyone watching at home, knew this wasn't politics anymore. This was about to become a reckoning. And then he was there. Not in the room, but looming over it. The giant screen cracked to life without warning. And there he was, Donald J. Trump, filling the frame like a tidal wave swallowing a quiet harbor. No intro, no soft entry, just power, unfiltered. His face, tight with frustration, stared directly into the camera, as if he was looking past the lens and straight into the soul of the room. No flag behind him, no press secretary, just him, at the resolute desk, shirt sleeves rolled up and red tie hanging loose like a warning flare. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Jasmine sat poised, silent, grounded. Trump arrived like a wrecking ball mid-swing. His voice didn't just echo, it detonated through the speakers, sharp and booming, slicing across the silence like a crack of thunder in an empty canyon. "Jasmine, I had to call in. I couldn't sit back and let this joke of a conversation go unchecked." He didn't breathe between sentences. He didn't ease in. This wasn't debate. It was domination by volume. "You talk a lot, I'll give you that. But you've done nothing. You've accomplished nothing. You're inexperienced, unqualified. Just another amateur in a suit who thinks sound bites make policy." The room reacted like it had been slapped. Some people shifted in their chairs, uncomfortable but glued in place. Others let out low gasps. A man in the front row muttered, "He's going for blood." A woman near the back shook her head and whispered, "Typical." But no one interrupted, because this wasn't the kind of noise you talked over. It was the kind of noise that dared you to blink. Trump leaned in closer to the lens. The camera feed caught every crease in his forehead, every twitch in his jaw. He didn't stop. "You and your party, total disaster. Under Democrats, everything falls apart. Cities are falling into chaos, the economy's a mess, and nobody knows what the hell is going on at the border." He waved his hand like he was brushing away facts. "I built things. I fixed things. You make speeches. I make results." His hand hit the desk in front of him with a dull thud, and the mic picked it up. "People don't need more noise. They need strength, and you don't have it." The final line landed with brutal precision. And still, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't even move. But the air had shifted. This wasn't just a disruption anymore. It was an ambush. And the entire country was watching to see if she would crack, or if she would rise. And just when it seemed he'd slow down, he doubled down instead. Trump straightened up in his chair like he'd just remembered who the cameras were really for. His voice, already loud, grew sharper, like he was now speaking less to Jasmine and more to the nation watching from living rooms, airports, and smartphones. His eyes narrowed, his hands moving with that familiar rhythm, slicing the air like a conductor orchestrating outrage. "We had the strongest economy the world has ever seen." The words came out like a declaration of war. "Unemployment, lowest in 50 years. Record numbers." He punched the phrases, one after another, like hitting buttons on a machine that only printed victory. And the military? Stronger than ever. Nobody wanted to mess with us. He leaned into the camera now, voice like gravel soaked in adrenaline. Everyone knows it. The numbers speak for themselves. And they're mine. The final line lingered, not because it was profound, but because it was sharp, loud, and loaded with intent. It wasn't just boasting, it was bait. The room changed instantly. The air, once tense, turned lead-heavy. Like gravity had deepened for everyone at once. Rows of chairs felt stiffer. People sat taller, but tighter, like their backs were braced for impact. A veteran near the front lowered his head slightly, hands gripped together, as if holding something back. A retired teacher closed her notebook without realizing she had. A college student in the third row mouthed, "Seriously?" but didn't look away. Even the stage lights seemed colder, as if the room itself had gone on alert. No one clapped. No one cheered. But no one laughed either. Because this wasn't entertainment, it was escalation. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, still as a statue carved from defiance. She hadn't twitched, hadn't blinked. Her hands rested in her lap like she was holding back a verdict. Every eye in the room, every lens, every screen, locked on her, waiting. Not because they were curious, because they knew. Whatever she was about to say next had to silence a storm. The applause never came for him, but silence had paved the stage for her. Jasmine didn't move. Not when Trump raised his voice. Not when he jabbed the air with every word like he was swatting truth away. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes, didn't even blink. Her posture was perfect, like a still frame in a storm. Hands folded gently, eyes focused forward, breathing slow. It was the kind of calm that didn't need to shout, the kind that let noise collapse under its own weight. Trump's voice finally cut out. His image froze on the screen for half a second, mouth open, expression halfway between triumph and rage. And then came silence. Jasmine glanced at the screen once, then slowly turned to the crowd. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed with clarity so sharp it sliced through every leftover echo. The American people don't care who yells the loudest. She let the words hang just long enough for their weight to settle. They care who tells the truth. That was it. 16 words. No thunder, no fury. But the effect? Instant. The room exploded in applause. Not polite, not hesitant, but fierce and immediate. Chairs shook. A woman in the back stood up with both hands in the air. A group of veterans clapped hard enough to echo. One camera zoomed in just in time to catch a man mouthing, "That's what I'm talking about." It wasn't just what Jasmine said. It was how she said it. Unshaken, unapologetic, unmoved. The contrast was searing. Trump, all noise and heat, burning bright and fast. Jasmine, a slow flame that didn't flicker under pressure, only grew stronger. And for the first time that night, the room didn't belong to the man yelling from the screen. It belonged to the woman who never raised her voice. But Trump wasn't done, and what came next didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like war. The screen flashed again, this time closer. Trump's face filled the frame, his expression sharper, more deliberate. His tone shifted. Not loud, not explosive, but dangerously cold. His lips curled into a smirk that didn't invite debate, it challenged it. Then he started throwing punches, not with fists, but with claims designed to wound. The Democrats failed us in China. They let Iran walk all over us. And don't get me started on Obamacare. It's a disaster, a total disaster. He paused for half a second, letting the echo of the word disaster stain the air like smoke in a locked room. His hands slammed down on the table in front of him, off-screen but audible. Papers rustled. Someone gasped. While I was making America strong again, they were making us weak. Weak on trade, weak on borders, weak on everything. Each repetition of weak was like the pounding of a gavel. Brutal, final, unapologetic. He wasn't appealing for agreement, he was declaring judgment. Then came the knife. Obamacare? It's broken. Millions are paying more for less. And who's responsible? The same people sitting right in front of you. The camera didn't move, but everyone in the room instinctively turned toward Jasmine. He hadn't said her name, but he didn't have to. The indictment hung in the air like a noose, invisible but undeniable. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Chairs creaked under clenched postures. Pens froze above yellow legal pads. Even the aides behind the committee desk stopped typing. Trump didn't blink, his jaw locked in place like a man waiting for someone to fire back so he could strike again. But Jasmine said nothing. Not yet, because she didn't need to match his volume. She needed to wait, just long enough for the weight of his words to turn against themselves. And though no one said it aloud, everyone in the room felt the same thing. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The air hadn't even settled from Trump's rant when Jasmine calmly straightened her mic. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the evidence. She began, not with emotion, but with data. Over 700,000 jobs disappeared in just 1 month. She wasn't exaggerating. She was citing January 2009, when the U.S. economy shed more than 741,000 jobs, according to official records from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Trump had painted Democrats as reckless, but Jasmine made clear the collapse happened under Republican leadership, and it took bold action, not blame, to stop the bleeding. She kept going, voice even, eyes steady. The auto industry and the banking sector stood on the edge of collapse. That wasn't political spin. GM and Chrysler had narrowly avoided shutdown. Ford barely survived. And while Wall Street giants were crumbling, Trump had gone on TV back then and mocked the bailouts. But Jasmine reminded the room that letting those industries fall would have meant tens of millions unemployed, pensions wiped out, entire cities gutted. Then she hit the turn, a different tone, one of quiet resolve. Because of the right policies, millions of families kept their jobs, and millions more got health insurance for the first time. That was Obamacare. That was the stimulus. That was expanded Medicaid. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And Jasmine didn't pretend otherwise. She just stated facts. People survived. Unemployment fell. The uninsured rate hit historic lows. Under her party's policies, not under Trump's. People started clapping, not out of partisanship, but recognition. Many in that room had lived it. 2008, 2009. They remembered the pink slips, the foreclosures, the fear. And they also remembered when things slowly started turning around. Jasmine gave them that memory back, with clarity. The applause grew, first a few, then a wave. Trump's eyes narrowed. His lips curled. He slammed his fist on the table. "Fake numbers, totally fake," he shouted. But this time his voice didn't travel. It got swallowed up by the sound of hands coming together. Not because the numbers were perfect, but because they were real. The cheers were still echoing in the chamber when a different kind of voice broke through. Raw, lived, and impossible to ignore. From the far left side of the gallery, a man slowly stood. His back was stiff, his right arm trembling slightly, his chest decorated with faded military pins that spoke of wars long past but never forgotten. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need a microphone. His voice cut through the air like a blade forged in silence. "We need leaders who listen, not ones who brag." There was no applause, just stunned stillness. The kind of stillness that meant something had shifted. Lawmakers turned in their seats. Even aides stopped typing. This wasn't a protest. It was a reckoning. A few rows away, another figure rose. A woman in her 70s, hair pinned back neatly, dressed in a worn cardigan that looked like it had seen 1,000 classrooms. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words floated like truth carried by time. Democracy survives on resolve, not on screaming. The chamber didn't erupt, but it breathed collectively. The silence after her words was louder than any gavel slam. Jasmine looked at her with quiet respect. She didn't smile. She nodded, because this wasn't about her. It was about truth finally finding its voice in a place built to ignore it. The room shifted. Something deeper than applause swept through the air. Support rose like a tide, quiet but unstoppable. One person stood, then 3, then 10, not to shout, not to protest, but simply to bear witness. They didn't need banners. Their presence was the banner. Jasmine remained motionless. Her power wasn't in motion, it was in gravity. People weren't just behind her now, they were with her. The lines in the room weren't political anymore. They were human. And then, like a fuse catching fire, Trump snapped. His face flushed a deeper red, not the confident swagger of defiance, but the unraveling heat of someone losing control. He gripped the edge of the desk like it might keep him from sliding. Then he shouted once, then again, "I'm winning! Everyone knows I'm winning!" His voice cracked slightly, but he repeated it like a broken record trying to outshout the truth. "I'm winning!" The words hung in the air, hollow, aimless. No one responded, not even his allies. The silence around him didn't just grow, it consumed. And in that crackling silence, between Trump's unraveling and the room's awakening, Jasmine moved. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, like someone about to drop the final card in a high-stakes game. Her eyes locked onto Trump's face with laser focus. Her tone was steady, strong, not angry, not smug, just piercingly sure. "Mr. President, when you have to keep telling people you're winning, it usually means you're losing where it matters most." She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just let the sentence land like thunder wrapped in calm. For a second, the entire chamber froze, like it couldn't quite believe what it had just heard. The words hovered in the air, heavier than any insult, sharper than any gavel. Trump's mouth hung open, stunned into silence, as if he expected another outburst to shield him. But nothing came. No one moved. No one breathed. Then suddenly, the silence broke, like glass under pressure. The chamber erupted. Applause burst like fireworks in a vault. People shot to their feet, clapping, whistling, shouting not just in approval, but in release. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply sat back, composed, her expression unreadable, but her presence undeniable. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a turning point, a moment people would replay, quote, remember. And just when Trump thought the worst was over, Jasmine reached for something that didn't need emotion. It just needed ink. Jasmine moved slowly, deliberately, as if the entire room were being held on a string she alone controlled. Her hand slipped beneath the folder resting on her table, fingers brushing past earlier exhibits until she pulled out one plain document. No headline, no red circles, just a cold official sheet. The golden seal of the Bureau of Labor Statistics shimmered beneath the overhead light, like a verdict waiting to be read. She didn't need to explain what it was. The sharp eyes in the room, the press, the aides, even the back row interns recognized it instantly. A federal audit, not commentary, not speculation, just facts. The paper wasn't thick, but the weight of what it carried was crushing. Jasmine let the silence breathe for a second longer before her voice cut through like a scalpel. According to the Bureau's official audit for the month of October, actual job growth was only 148,000, half of the 300,000 number you keep repeating to the public. She didn't yell. She didn't raise an eyebrow. She just read it like someone tired of pretending numbers could be argued with. Her tone was so calm it became terrifying, because everyone knew calm is what comes right before the storm. A few people in the chamber shifted in their seats. Some whispered. A Republican aide near the exit froze mid-step. But Jasmine hadn't finished. She slowly looked up, not at Trump, but straight into the camera. Her gaze didn't blink, didn't soften. It felt like she was looking past the lens, speaking directly to every single viewer across the country who'd ever been told a half-truth by someone in a $3,000 suit. Then she said it, clean, final, unshakable. "Mr. President, numbers don't lie, but politicians sometimes do." The words fell like a gavel, final and echoing. For a heartbeat, no one made a sound, not even a breath. It was like the room itself had gone into cardiac arrest. And then it happened, release. The chamber erupted, chairs scraped back as people jumped to their feet. Palms clapped so hard they echoed off the marble walls. Cries of "that's the truth" surged from the gallery, cutting through the chaos like war drums. It wasn't just applause. It was a verdict from the people. Jasmine didn't move. She stayed standing, holding the document like a torch. She didn't gloat. didn't grin. The strength of the moment was in its restraint. Around her the noise surged, but she remained still, as if daring anyone to call the numbers fake to her face. And then, the cameras caught him. Trump was frozen. Not the usual bluster, not the arm-flailing rage. Just still. His eyes darted, searching for a foothold, a teleprompter. Anything. His lips moved first, scrambling to piece together a response. "Fake! Rigged!" he snapped, but the voice cracked halfway through. He tried to stand taller, but his shoulders hunched instead, like the air around him had changed pressure. The words were his, but the confidence was gone, and the eyes, his eyes, betrayed him. They didn't burn with defiance. They blinked with panic. For once, Trump had no nickname, no insult, no story to spin. All he had was a number, and that number didn't lie. The crowd was still echoing from her final blow, but Jasmine didn't need to ride the applause. She had already moved on. Jasmine eased back into her chair as if she'd just closed a file, not cracked open a presidency. Her hands were steady, her breath controlled, her face unreadable. The calm after a precise political storm. With quiet deliberation, she unscrewed the cap from her water bottle, lifted it, and took a single sip. She wasn't smirking. She wasn't triumphant. She was grounded, as if the weight of truth didn't demand celebration, only responsibility. And that's what made it more devastating. The host tried to salvage the airwaves. "If we could just return to," he began, tapping his mic with a nervous smile. But his voice drowned under a swelling surge of energy in the room. The crowd, which had been holding its breath moments earlier, erupted into clapping, shouts, and even laughter. Their bodies surged forward in their seats, like they wanted to be closer to whatever just happened. The tension had cracked, and in its place came the release. Loud, raw, human. Then cutting through the chaos like a blade, came a voice from the back. "She buried you!" A shockwave of laughter swept through the chamber. Some gasped, some laughed uncontrollably, others pounded the table as if affirming a verdict just handed down. A woman in the second row wiped a tear from her eye. A man near the side muttered, "Damn right." The entire space was ungovernable for a full 10 seconds. Not because of disrespect, but because the truth had found oxygen, and now it was wildfire. The camera feed flipped to Trump's live screen, and it wasn't the usual version, the confident, defiant showman politician. This was something different. He froze mid-sentence. The flush crept across his cheeks, rising like a tide of something he rarely felt. Exposure. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Fake," he snapped. "Rigged. Total hoax." But the power behind those words had vanished. They were sharp only in sound, not in impact. For the first time they rang hollow, like a firework that fizzled before the sky. Behind him his aides shifted awkwardly. One leaned over to check the feed delay. Another scribbled something on a notepad, avoiding eye contact. But it didn't matter. The camera stayed on him, lingering like a spotlight that had caught its prey out of costume. In the studio, the host tried again. "Let's, please, regain order." But no one listened. The room now belonged to Jasmine, even though she hadn't said a single word since sitting down. She didn't raise a finger, didn't gloat. She simply placed her water bottle down, leaned back slightly, and let the noise pass over her like a wave she'd seen coming all along. Her silence was louder than the cheers. It didn't demand recognition. It commanded it. And the man on the screen, once untouchable, was now just a silhouette behind a wall of noise, drowned out by something more powerful than spin. Facts delivered with poise. The broadcast cut to a wide-angle shot of the hearing room, but it was no longer just a room. It had become an arena, a stage where power had been flipped, even if only for a few minutes, and the world was watching. Moments earlier, Jasmine had delivered a precision strike. Statistics in one hand, truth in the other, and a voice that refused to bend. Now that moment was catching fire, faster than anyone inside the chamber could realize. And outside its walls, the ripple was turning into a wave. Within minutes, every major network cut into scheduled programming. CNN's red banner lit up. Crockett silences Trump with facts and truth. Their anchors couldn't contain it. They replayed her line, "Mr. President, numbers don't lie, but politicians sometimes do," 3 times within the hour. Each playback was slower, zoomed in, with commentary layered on top. One analyst called it one of the most composed demolitions we've seen on a live stage in years. Another simply whispered, "That's going to be studied in media schools." MSNBC went further. They called it a historic moment, not just for the Democratic Party, not just for Jasmine Crockett, but for anyone who's ever been told to sit down and smile while power lies to their face. The clip looped behind the panelists as they dissected every frame. Jasmine's calm, her timing, the stillness before she spoke, the chaos that followed. It wasn't anger, it wasn't volume, it was clarity, one commentator said. She used a government-issued report like a scalpel. Over at Fox News, the tone was explosive. Some anchors attempted to downplay the clip, labeling it a partisan ambush. But even they couldn't escape the footage that was already dominating every screen. Tucker Carlson, reluctantly breaking his typical bravado, muttered, "Well, I mean, she did have the numbers, didn't she?" The split screen of Jasmine's calm stare beside Trump's red-faced outburst was impossible to ignore. The silence that followed on air spoke louder than anything the panel could have said. But television was only part of the storm. Online, it became a cultural earthquake. On TikTok, the moment was reborn within minutes. Clips titled, "When Facts End the Circus," racked up millions of views. Teenagers who'd never watched a congressional hearing in their lives were now remixing Jasmine's words with cinematic music, turning her line, "Numbers don't lie, but politicians sometimes do," into a beat drop. One viral video layered the phrase over dramatic footage of courtroom slams, adding text that read, "The real state of the union." On Twitter, the memes came like wildfire. One tweet showed a still image of Jasmine calmly holding the Bureau of Labor Statistics report, facing down Trump mid-rant. The caption read, "When mom brings receipts to the family argument." Another paired Trump's flustered face with the phrase, "Fake, rigged," and beneath it, "When the facts don't support the fiction." Within hours, Crockett was trending in 11 countries. Verified journalists, artists, professors, veterans, even former Republican aides were retweeting the clip with one-word captions like "power," "oof," and "finally." The Atlantic's editor-in-chief posted, "In an era of noise, clarity wins." Crockett didn't shout, she showed. YouTube lit up. Reaction channels, usually reserved for music videos or courtroom dramas, jumped on the moment. A retired Navy officer paused the clip mid-replay and said, "That's what we call a kill shot." A former prosecutor broke it down frame by frame, like it was the Zapruder film. "This isn't just a fact check," she said. "This is a rhetorical masterclass." She neutralized the most combative political figure in America with a sentence and a page number. Even comedians couldn't resist. Late-night hosts, from Colbert to Myers, opened their monologues with it. Colbert joked, "Jasmine Crockett just redefined what it means to read someone for filth, and she used government data to do it." Audience laughter turned to applause when the clip played again, unedited. But the emotional punch came not from the satire, it came from everyday people. A single mother in Michigan tweeted, "I've been screamed at by bosses who were dead wrong. Watching Jasmine stare down that man with facts, it healed something I didn't know was broken." Her tweet was reshared over 70,000 times. A veteran from Georgia posted, "I fought for this country. Today, I finally saw someone fight for truth like it mattered." A young woman posted a side-by-side photo. On the left, a screenshot of Trump mid-yell. On the right, Jasmine with a calm, focused expression, report in hand. Her caption, "Louder doesn't mean stronger." Teachers began sharing the clip in government and speech classes. Professors uploaded annotated versions, highlighting rhetorical structure and pacing. One English teacher posted, "I've taught persuasion for 17 years. Today I found the perfect example." But perhaps the most telling sign of impact came from the silence. Trump, usually quick to fire back with a post, a nickname, or a rally soundbite, remained unusually quiet for several hours. His social media team scrambled to deflect. posting grainy charts, cherry-picked quotes, out-of-context headlines. But none of it stuck, because the original moment was so clear, so complete, that nothing could spin it out of shape. At a late-night appearance on a friendly network, Trump finally addressed it, but even then, his voice lacked its usual force. "It was rigged," he muttered. "That report, full of errors, fake stats." But as he spoke, the split screen beside him showed Jasmine's calm, poised delivery, word for word, next to the official BLS data. The contrast was brutal. His volume rose, but his conviction fell flat. Meanwhile, Jasmine said nothing more that night. No victory lap, no viral tweet, no media blitz, just silence. And in that silence, the country spoke for her. Clips of her sitting down after the exchange, composed, sipping water, no smugness in her face, flooded timelines. One video slowed down the exact second she placed the paper back on the desk, layered with soft piano music and a caption. "This is what dignity looks like." Memes exploded. One had her face photoshopped onto a Marvel superhero, holding the BLS report like a shield. Another turned her phrase into merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, phone cases with bold black letters. Numbers don't lie, but politicians sometimes do. The phrase was now being used in classrooms, staff meetings, campaign slogans, even sermons. By morning, the moment had become legend. Political consultants called it the most effective unscripted moment in modern hearing history. Cultural critics called it the rare blend of truth, timing, and temperament. Teenagers were quoting it, boomers were resharing it, and voters, across party lines, were saying the same thing. That's what we need more of. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She reframed the conversation. She reminded the country what truth sounds like when it's delivered without apology. And for one breathtaking night, in the middle of a divided, chaotic, performative world, facts stood tall, and the lie couldn't find a place to hide. But just when the chamber thought it had heard the last word, Jasmine delivered one that echoed far beyond its walls. She didn't slam the table. She didn't point a finger. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stood tall, spine straight, eyes locked with the entire chamber, and then with the camera. There was no quiver in her breath, no hesitation in her tone. She spoke like someone who knew she had already won. "The future of our democracy," she said slowly, "is too important to get lost in the noise." And with that, she ended it. Not with thunder, but with precision. The room didn't burst into applause. It didn't have to. The silence was its own verdict. Lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if realizing they were no longer participants, but witnesses. Some blinked, unsure whether to speak. Others simply stared, realizing something irreversible had just happened. Jasmine hadn't delivered a performance. She had issued a challenge. Trump's team sat frozen. His advisors glanced at each other but said nothing. Even the security guards at the back of the chamber leaned in, as if the words were meant for them too. The weight of her sentence hung in the air like fog before a storm. Not loud but heavy, inescapable. Jasmine gathered her papers calmly, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Outside the chamber, the reporters scrambled. Microphones were dropped. Laptops clicked open like weapons being drawn. CNN was first to push the quote out. MSNBC followed. Fox, hesitant at first, finally broke the tension with a chyron that simply read, "Composure versus chaos," and composure won. That phrase, short, sharp, undefeated, became the defining label of what had just taken place. But it wasn't the networks that gave it life. It was the people. In a crowded coffee shop in Baltimore, a young woman looked up from her phone, tapped her friend, and whispered the line. "Too important to get lost in the noise?" The barista overheard and printed it on every receipt that day. In a quiet classroom in Ohio, a history teacher paused her lecture to write the words on the board. The kids stared at it, silent, not confused but curious. What noise? What democracy? And why did it feel like this mattered more than anything they'd learned that week? In a barbershop in Atlanta, the sentence was repeated like gospel. One man leaned back in the chair and said, "That woman didn't come to play." His barber replied, "She didn't come to shout either." And that's what makes it hit harder. In Philadelphia, a bus driver placed a sticky note above the steering wheel with Jasmine's line written in Sharpie. By the end of his shift, passengers had started taking pictures of it. The quote found its way into spaces no political message usually reached. Above the sink in a diner kitchen, on the mirror in a women's shelter, scribbled on a napkin by a single mom packing lunches. The power of Jasmine's words wasn't in how she said them. It was in how real they felt. Calm, grounded, unshakable. It wasn't a slogan, it was a lifeline. On radio stations across the country, hosts played the clip again and again. Talk show guests debated whether that moment would define a political generation. A podcast host choked up mid-sentence and had to stop recording. A minister in Detroit rewrote his Sunday sermon to end with Jasmine's line. "The future of our democracy is too important," he told his congregation, "to get drowned in division, to be eaten by ego, to be trampled under noise." Art followed. Street murals began to appear. Black and white portraits of Jasmine with her final line etched in bold across brick walls. A graphic designer in Seattle printed limited edition posters. "Noise fades. Democracy doesn't." A TikTok video stitched Jasmine's words over images of protests, riots, courtrooms, and finally, a child holding a paper ballot. It hit 1 million views in 3 hours. Even those who had criticized her before couldn't deny it now. A former senator tweeted, "I've served 30 years in that chamber, and I've never seen a closing line land like that." A prominent columnist wrote, "She didn't crush her opponent. She reminded the country who it belongs to." Overnight, pundits dropped the word viral. This wasn't viral. This was seismic. Back in Washington, something rare happened. Silence lasted. No rebuttals. No spin. Trump's legal team retreated into closed doors. His spokesperson canceled the press conference scheduled for the following morning. There was no reply strong enough, no insult clever enough. Because Jasmine hadn't insulted anyone. She had simply drawn a line and dared the country to see which side it stood on. Behind the scenes, staffers were stunned. Aides rewatched the moment on loop. Phones buzzed with clips. Even opposing lawmakers, those who had rolled their eyes hours earlier, sat in their offices with the footage paused, staring at her still frame. Jasmine standing still, calm in the eye of a storm. One advisor whispered, "She didn't need a gavel." That line was the gavel. That night, the quote made the cover of every major newspaper. Time, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Even tabloids couldn't resist. The Daily Mail called it the line that froze the Capitol. But even then, the most powerful headlines didn't come from newsrooms. They came from chalkboards in schools, from signs taped on refrigerators, from conversations between fathers and daughters, between strangers in elevators, between teachers and janitors. It was in the way people looked at each other differently, like they had just remembered they had a voice too. One teenager in Milwaukee posted a TikTok with tears in her eyes saying, "I don't know everything about politics, but I know that line made me want to learn." A 65-year-old veteran commented, "I've seen politicians my whole life. Never seen one shut it down like that." A retired librarian wrote on Facebook, "She didn't speak over them. She spoke beyond them." And perhaps that was the difference. Jasmine hadn't tried to win the moment. She aimed for something larger. She didn't try to be louder. She became clearer. And in a world drowning in noise, where shouting often wins airtime and anger earns headlines, clarity hit like thunder. It didn't just land, it stayed. And so, long after the chamber emptied, long after the cameras stopped rolling, long after Trump's team filed back into their limos, tight-lipped and rattled, her words remained. They echoed in office elevators, in voicemail signatures, in public transit announcements. One airport gate agent in Dallas closed her shift by saying it over the intercom. A middle school debate team adopted it as their motto. And somewhere in rural Arkansas, a farmer carved it into wood and nailed it above his barn door. Because somehow Jasmine Crockett, in one breath, with no notes, no theatrics, had handed the country a mirror and a message. The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise. And people heard it. They didn't just clap. They carried it. And from that silence, one final truth began to crystallize. Leadership is not about who can shout the loudest. That was the lesson seared into the room, into the cameras, into the millions who replayed the clip that night. The contrast had been laid bare. Trump had raised his volume until his voice cracked, while Jasmine had lowered hers until the silence itself carried more weight than thunder. In the end, no one remembered his yelling. They remembered her stillness, her restraint, and her choice to wield facts instead of fury. That was the line of demarcation, and the world could see it clearly. Jasmine's calm became the example people didn't know they had been waiting for. She reminded them that power doesn't always sound like fire. Sometimes it sounds like composure. She showed that truth, when spoken with conviction, doesn't need to be amplified. It needs only to be clear. The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise, she had said, and the phrase became more than a warning. It became a mirror. People everywhere began to ask themselves what kind of leadership they wanted, the chaos or the calm. The media seized the contrast instantly. Editorial boards wrote headlines not about policy, but about tone. Crockett demonstrates power in silence. Anchors called it the new playbook for leadership. One commentator summed it up bluntly. What we saw was composure versus chaos, and composure won. It was the kind of verdict no pollster, no spin doctor, no strategist could rewrite, because it wasn't delivered by pundits. It was delivered by the people watching, nodding, whispering, repeating. In diners, men leaned over cups of coffee and said, "She never raised her voice, and she still won." In classrooms, teachers explained to their students that facts win arguments, not volume. In barbershops, the phrase was repeated like a hymn. "Leaders don't need to scream," a barber in Detroit said. "If they're standing on the truth does the screaming for them." Customers laughed, clapped, nodded, because everyone in the room knew exactly what he meant. That single night, a congressional interruption, chaotic, unscripted, dangerous even, had been transformed into something else. It was no longer just a viral moment. It was a historical marker. Jasmine Crockett had turned a man's attempt to derail her into proof that dignity still had a place in American politics. She had taken the raw material of chaos and shaped it into clarity, leaving behind something that felt larger than politics, larger than parties. It felt like justice itself, standing upright in front of the world. And it wasn't just about what happened in Phoenix, it was about what it meant everywhere else. People saw that moment and realized leadership could be something different. It didn't have to be bluster. It didn't have to be noise. It could be calm. It could be truth. It could be respect for the people who sent you into that chamber in the first place. Jasmine had proven that with a single line. In New York, a father explained it to his daughter at the dinner table. "Leaders don't need to shout," he said, pointing at the TV replaying the clip. "They need to tell the truth." His daughter nodded, eyes wide, repeating the phrase under her breath. In Texas, a veteran told his friends at the VFW hall, "That's the kind of leader I fought for. Not one who brags, but one who stands steady when the fire comes." Around the country, those conversations multiplied. The truth of it resonated because it was so rare. People were used to politicians shouting over each other, drowning out questions, chasing headlines. They were used to anger being mistaken for strength. But Jasmine showed something else. She showed that composure itself could be a weapon. She showed that the calmest person in the room is often the one holding the most power. And the public, exhausted from years of noise, clung to that idea. Commentators began calling it the Crockett principle. They described it as a way of leadership defined not by volume, but by veracity, not by dominance, but by discipline. One columnist wrote, "Trump gave us a blueprint for how power collapses under its own weight. Crockett gave us a blueprint for how power holds when it's anchored in truth." Another called it a moment that exposed the difference between performance and leadership. Even critics admitted the force of it. Trump's rage had been expected. Jasmine's restraint was not. And that difference changed everything. When history looked back at that night, it would not remember the insults. It would remember the stillness, the steady delivery, the calm hand on the paper. Because the lesson was not just political, it was human. Leadership wasn't about demanding attention, it was about commanding respect. Jasmine's victory was bigger than one man, bigger than one chamber. She had proven that democracy itself thrives not in the noise of spectacle, but in the clarity of accountability. She had shown that respect for the people, their intelligence, their memory, their dignity, mattered more than headlines. And she had done it without theatrics, without shouting, without breaking her own center. That was why the moment mattered, because it was not just about her, it was about the country itself. In the days that followed, people repeated the message everywhere. A nurse taped the line above her hospital time clock. A college student scrawled it across her notebook. A mechanic painted it on the side of his garage. The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise. It became a touchstone, a rallying cry not for one party, but for anyone who had ever felt drowned out by the chaos of politics. And in every retelling, the same truth surfaced. Leadership doesn't require shouting. It requires composure. It requires facts. It requires respect. Jasmine Crockett had turned an interruption, a chaotic, unplanned, disruptive stunt, into the clearest reminder of that truth in modern memory. She didn't just silence a man, she amplified a message. And that message spread because it was simple, it was undeniable, and it was needed. That night, the hearing chamber became more than a political stage. It became a classroom, a courtroom, a cathedral, and Jasmine Crockett became something more than a congresswoman. She became a symbol of what leadership could look like if people chose clarity over chaos, calm over noise, truth over bluster. One interruption had become a moment of history, and one sentence had become the measure of leadership. But beyond the clash, beyond the noise and the applause, what lingered was a lesson far deeper than politics. The story was not only about Jasmine Crockett silencing chaos with composure. It was about what that moment revealed to everyone watching, the kind of strength the world actually needs. Leadership, stripped to its core, is not a fist slammed on a table. It is not a voice raised above the crowd until the crowd gives in. True leadership is the ability to stay grounded when the storm rises, to cling to truth when lies swirl like fire, and to remind people of their worth when others try to drown them in noise. That was the lesson etched into every second of that confrontation. Jasmine showed that respect for the people is not found in how loudly you claim to defend them, but in how carefully you tell them the truth. She could have yelled back. She could have matched insult with insult, but instead she trusted the audience to recognize authenticity when they heard it. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was confidence. Her refusal to trade chaos for chaos wasn't restraint, it was strategy. In a culture addicted to volume, she proved silence can thunder. And millions of people felt that thunder in their bones. The human lesson here is universal. Power without humility collapses, but composure rooted in truth endures. Parents repeated her line to their children, not because it was political, but because it carried wisdom that could be used in a schoolyard as much as in Congress. Coaches told their teams, "Don't brag about winning, play the game right." Pastors reminded their congregations that truth doesn't always need a microphone. And ordinary citizens whispered to themselves that if she could stand steady under fire, so could they in their daily battles. The scene was political, yes, but the lesson was personal. How many of us have faced someone shouting us down at work, in our families, in our communities? How many of us have felt that pressure to shout back, to fight fire with fire? Jasmine's answer was simple and devastating. Don't play their game. Play yours. Stay calm. Tell the truth. Let it stand. In a single moment, she modeled a way of being that millions realized they could carry into their own lives. Because the truth is, democracy is not only about ballots and chambers. It lives in classrooms, in coffee shops, in the quiet moments where people decide whether to listen or dismiss. Jasmine's line, "The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise," was not just about government. It was about life itself. It was about refusing to let the noise of hate, anger, or ego drown out the voices that matter most. It was about clarity, courage, and respect. And that resonated with anyone who had ever been silenced. The drama of that hearing room became a parable. Chaos, bluster, ego, they will always exist. But composure, clarity, and truth have the power to cut through them. Trump roared, but Jasmine stood. He shouted, but she spoke. And that contrast became a lesson that spread like wildfire. Leadership, at its best, is not domination. It is devotion. Devotion to the truth, devotion to the people, devotion to the idea that dignity should never be drowned out. The humanistic lesson goes further. Silence is not surrender. Calm is not weakness. When rooted in truth, these things become weapons sharper than any insult. Jasmine transformed a political ambush into a universal reminder that humanity thrives when we listen before we speak, when we weigh our words before we throw them like stones. That was why the clip played on repeat in homes, offices, and classrooms. People saw not just a politician, but a human being who modeled courage without cruelty and strength without noise. There is another truth in her story. Democracy itself is fragile, and it depends on the choices of ordinary people. Jasmine's moment was not just about defeating an opponent. It was about reminding everyone that the health of a democracy depends on how its citizens respond to chaos. Do they echo it or do they rise above it? That is the question her line forced everyone to ask. And it is the same question each of us must answer in our daily lives. The crowd in that chamber was not clapping for Jasmine alone. They were clapping for themselves, for the part of them that still wanted leadership rooted in honesty, for the part that still believed truth could stand on its own. That is why the applause was so fierce, why the words spread so quickly. People recognized themselves in her composure. They recognized the leader they wanted, but more importantly, they recognized the neighbor, the parent, the teacher, the friend they wanted to be. The drama of politics often feels far removed from daily life, but not this time. A father told his son, "See, you don't have to scream to be heard." A teacher told her students, "Respect people enough to tell them the truth." A pastor told his church, "Noise fades, but truth lasts." And in all those small conversations, the bigger lesson lived on. Jasmine Crockett had not only confronted a man, she had confronted a culture of noise and offered a better way. The cinematic tension of that night wasn't just entertainment, it was instruction. Every raised eyebrow, every pause, every carefully chosen word was a blueprint for how to face chaos without losing yourself. Jasmine didn't fight for applause. She fought for the principle that leadership is service, not performance. And by the time the night ended, millions understood that principle more clearly than ever. That is why the story didn't fade when the cameras turned off. It deepened. Because in the end, the human message was this: our world doesn't need more volume. It needs more vision. It doesn't need more chaos. It needs more composure. It doesn't need leaders who brag about winning. It needs leaders who remind us what's at stake. Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence a man. She awakened a lesson, one that belongs not to her, but to everyone who chooses to carry it. And so the story of that night lives on, not because of the clash, but because of the clarity. People will forget the insults, the yelling, the spin, but they will remember the silence before she spoke. They will remember the calm in her eyes. They will remember the line that cut through the chaos, and they will carry the lesson forward. Leadership is not about noise. It is about respect, truth, and composure. And after the lesson echoed through the room, the question turned outward. What will you do with it? This was never meant to stay inside four walls. Jasmine's final line was not a mic drop. It was a map. It pointed straight at the audience, at the country, at you. The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise. That wasn't a closing argument. It was a summons, a challenge for everyone who heard it to decide if they'd carry the message into their own streets, their own schools, their own homes. The first step is simple: stop feeding the noise. Every rumor shared without checking, every headline passed along without reading, every retweet without a source. It keeps chaos alive. Don't hand chaos a microphone. Ask questions, demand documents, read before you react. If the fact doesn't stand on paper, it doesn't deserve your voice. That one habit, repeated every day, can drain the oxygen from lies faster than any speech. The next step is to show up. Democracy does not live on cable news or trending hashtags. It breathes when people take seats in rooms that rarely go viral: school board meetings, city council sessions, neighborhood gatherings. Go once, speak once. Even if your hands shake, say the truth once. Because the loudest actors in the room aren't the ones remembered. The ones who speak calmly, with facts, shift the entire floor. Jasmine proved that in real time. Then turn it into rhythm. Don't wait for election years. Register early, verify deadlines, and help one other person do the same. Write a short note to your representative. 3 sentences, not 3 pages. Attend one hearing and bring a neighbor with you. Momentum doesn't come from slogans, it comes from calendars. And when the cycle of noise spins again, you'll already be planted where it matters. Guard your attention as fiercely as your vote. Outrage is addictive, and those who profit from it know it. Break the cycle. Follow fewer feeds. Read more pages. Share clarity, not clips. And when chaos tries to bait you, step sideways. Don't fight on their stage. Build your own. That's how you shift the script, from reaction to leadership. Leadership, after all, isn't about shouting. It's about standing steady when everyone else trembles. Jasmine didn't win that night because she was louder. She won because she respected the people enough to give them facts. That's the model to copy. At work, in families, in arguments with friends. Lower your voice, sharpen your point, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. You don't have to match chaos. You only have to outlast it. Teach it forward. Show kids what a primary source looks like. Let them see you pause before sharing, listen before answering, and admit when you're wrong. Tell them, this is what strength looks like. Calm, clear, steady. Pass them the habit of checking twice, speaking once. Democracy survives not just through laws, but through lessons passed from one generation to the next. Make it local too. Support the election workers, the librarians, the volunteers who keep the gears of truth turning. Thank them. Protect them. Stand with them if they're harassed. Because the small guardians of the system are often the first targets of chaos. And a democracy that forgets to protect its keepers doesn't last. Jasmine's words were aimed at leaders, but their shield belongs to everyone. Most of all, remember the blueprint she gave you. Composure against chaos, truth against noise, respect against ego. You don't need a title to practice it. You need only a choice. Every meeting, every argument, every time someone raises their voice to drown you out, breathe, steady, and reply with clarity. That's not just politics. That's power. So here is the call to action. Cut the noise, carry the facts, and move. Don't wait for another moment on TV to remind you what's at stake. Be the person who stands calm when others tremble. Be the one who speaks facts when others fling slogans. Be the one who respects the people in the room enough to give them the truth. That is how democracy survives. And when the next storm rises, and it will, remember the line that turned chaos into history. The future of our democracy is too important to get lost in the noise. Speak it, live it, and let the world see that composure wins when you choose it. Because in the end, it isn't about Jasmine Crockett and it isn't about Donald Trump. It's about us, the people who decide whether democracy is just a word or a living, breathing reality. Every generation is handed the same test. Will we let noise consume the truth, or will we steady ourselves and carry it forward? That night in Phoenix proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly with precision and leaves the room shaking. So carry her words into your workplace, into your schools, into your homes. Repeat them when the shouting starts, and let them remind you of what's worth fighting for. Because history doesn't wait for the loudest voice, it waits for the strongest truth. And the truth is this: the future of democracy belongs to those who refuse to let it drown. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.